Everybody wants to be happy, right? You do too. And if you're like most people, you're probably investing quite a bit into this. Maybe you're in therapy, working on yourself in a variety of different ways, and honestly, trying to get yourself straightened out from the inside out, which is a fantastic thing to do. Yet, research consistently shows that one of the keys, authentic, enduring happiness is not necessarily related to what is happening inside of you. It is related to the quality of your relationships, particularly with friendships. And this is such an important facet of not just well being, but of life. And so that's why on today's episode of Love, Happiness, and Success, we're going to do a deep dive into how to attend to this part of your life with intention. And so for this conversation, my guest is Kelly Stout. She is a writer, journalist, author who recently had a fantastic essay on this topic published in Esquire magazine. And the title of this, intriguingly, was Gave Myself a Month to Make One New Friend. How hard could that be? And some mayhem ensues, but Kelly is here with us today to talk about her experiences of researching and writing this piece and the big takeaways from it. And we're going to be talking about how you can apply this to your life too. So Kelly, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And thank you for your nice words about my essay.
I have to tell you, I had such a good time reading this essay. Like, I read all kinds of stuff online, just like randomly, and I can't even think of the last time I laughed out loud even once reading something that I just stumbled across online. And your article, it had me rolling. It was so much fun to read. And honestly, after reading it, I was like, I want to be friends with her because she's funny.
Thank you for saying that. As you know, I am in the market for new friends, so you've come to the right place.
Let's be friends. All right, I'm sold. Well, so tell us a little bit. Let's just start with some of the backstory. I mean, you got to this place in your life where, kind of maybe moving into more of a midlife experience, and you were like, where did everybody go? And just tell us a little bit about what happened.
Yeah, so I pitched this story after I had just finished up a long essay about productivity. I had sort of put myself to the test trying to become more productive, and I had driven myself a little bit bonkers trying to produce more and more work.
Oh my gosh,
and
I need to read that one.
I get your way. And it made me sort of question the concept of productivity. And I had an enjoyable time trying to decide what I valued and what I didn't in the sphere of work. And I realized that I hadn't really thought too much about what might be going on outside of work. And self-help is something that I think is a fascinating field. The intersection of like humility and humor and a real earnestness and wanting to improve yourself. I think there's something really universal about that. At the same time, there's a sort of like wanting to embrace a certain level of cheesiness that goes into wanting to improve yourself. There's just no way to kind of be cool while you're improving yourself. And
No.
So I pitched this. This is a long way of saying I pitched this essay because Esquire is a men's magazine, and the Surgeon General a couple of years ago declared loneliness an epidemic. And this is something that affects men in particular, but it affects all people of all genders. And I'd had this on my mind for a while. And I wasn't really sure why. I idly saw a bunch of articles answering the question of why, and they answered from all different perspectives. Phones are kind of an old chestnut. Oh, we're all addicted to our phones. Not that there's not a ton of truth in that, but I don't know if that answers the whole question. I saw one article, I think it was in the Atlantic, that blamed a lack of dining room tables in apartments, and I appreciated that one as sort of, your environment impacts your behavior. Of course it does. That explanation. There were a million out there. And but notice that I hadn't made a new friend in a while, not a real friend. I had a lot of friends, and in the essay, I make fun of myself quite a bit for how many times I say this. I'm going to go ahead and say it again for the record on this podcast for your millions, if not billions of listeners.
Billions. Yeah, let's go big.
Friends. But I realized I could draw a really thick line around who my friends were. I had very few questions about who my friends were. And I wasn't really making new ones. Not really. I had friendly acquaintances, people who I was totally psyched to see when I bumped into on the street, but not the types of people who I would really want to share any vulnerability of any kind with.
Yeah.
It just sort of bugged me. And that I hadn't really been trying. By almost as a joke, after I had finished this productivity essay, I pitched this to a few of the other editors here at Esquire, and our editor-in-chief, Michael, said, yeah, okay, assigned. It's assigned. And I thought, okay, I guess I have to do this now. And the conceit I gave myself was a month. Honestly, just because I thought, if I can't do this in a month, I'm never going to be able to do it. Everyone always asks after they hear that I recently finished an essay on this topic is, well, did you succeed? And the answer is sort of yes, sort of no.
Yeah. Well, but that's the thing, though, is that it is actually more difficult and more complex, particularly as you get out of your 20s and into your 30s and beyond. And that's why it's something that we all need to like pause and take stock of and think of, how do we want to put energy into this? Because it's really not just going to happen on its own.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say that one of the things that I did was start reading because I have a little bit of a nerdy personality. And so I thought might as well read some books first. The books I read was called Platonic, How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends by Dr. Marisa Franco. And I picked up the book because I heard her give an interesting interview in which she said that continuous unplanned interaction and shared vulnerability are two preconditions necessary to make a friend. That really struck a chord with me because I realized I didn't have a ton of moments in my day when I was having both.
Right.
At work, I think for most people in most work situations, you have a lot of unplanned interaction, but rare is the moment of vulnerability that sort of goes beyond, oh man, can you believe that the boss man is making us work this weekend? Or like, oh, can you believe that memo that just went around? It's vulnerable, but it's not really at all. It's like a sort of safety zone that you have to construct around yourself at work in order to thrive there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and so to set this up, because I'd love to dive deeper into what you've learned, would it be okay with you if I read a passage
of course
from your article
it.
that I think, and this is a little bit of a longer excerpt, but I think that this really, helps set this up. And I think you did such a beautiful job of putting into language this thing that many adults experience, but like it is difficult to articulate what is going on, but almost to like make sense of why. And so I thought that this was so beautiful. Okay. So you wrote, in my 20s, I had a friend that used to show up at my doorstep uninvited with a 6-pack of Red Stripe. She had a terrible job and a worse boyfriend. And whenever either was bumming her out, she'd plop down on the orange couch that my roommate had gotten from her dead great aunt and tell us everything. And in 2017, she moved to Montana. And I suppose if I had to pinpoint it, I'd say that's when the trouble began. One day it became undeniable that I had a friendship void in my life. I didn't lose my friends. There was no big dust up or disaster. No romantic rivalries or fights about politics had gotten in the way. And they didn't go missing exactly. I knew where they were. But after Red Stripe landed in Missoula, the couple whose deck we used to grill sausages on decamped to Vermont around the same time. time, I started acquiring my friends at an alarming rate. And the ones who remained all seemed to have colicky babies or punishing home renovation projects on their hands. And that's kind of what happens, isn't it? Like you have friends and we have this friend group and we have these lives, but then people evolve, life circumstances evolve, and it's sort of this gradual thing. But you kind of look up 5 or 10 years later and you're like, where did everybody go? And like you write about this experience of I don't have anybody to call on a random Tuesday and be like, hey, let's go have a beer.
Yeah, absolutely. I sure do
Yeah.
know. It happened slowly. And I think for a long time, I thought of this as a geographical problem.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, it's a big country and half my friends moved to LA, like the message that you just read from. I realized that there was sort of more than that, which was that I wasn't really acquiring additional friends that were feeling as deep as the ones who were moving across the country or who were renovating their home. And I mean, to say that the circumstances matter quite a bit. And what life stage you're in has all of these practical implications. I get into what having kids or not having kids does to friendships also in the piece, and I'm very happy to talk about that. But I realized that there was something a lot deeper than that. And so what I was looking for in this essay was in part to try and figure out what was going on. And I didn't really set out to provide the reader with instructions or advice of any kind. I'm not an expert on this, but I did hope to provide the pleasure of recognition to readers, to feeling I'm not alone in this, and maybe even make them laugh along the way. That was sort of the goal. Because I don't really know how to make friends, not to spoil the essay, but I don't really know how it's done. There's a real skill to it. And sometimes breaking things down into their component parts and viewing them as a skill set can make things a little less scary, I suppose, and a little funnier.
Definitely. Well, and you definitely did. I mean, you had some strategies that you deployed for sure. We could talk more about those. I mean, and maybe this is me reading through the lines, like definitely were learning some things along the way. But let's just start with this experiment, right? So you gave yourself a month to make new friends, and there were rules. You had defined your terms. Tell us a little bit more about your definition of the friend and how that is different from an acquaintance. Even.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you are right. I absolutely, I'm referring to the piece now because I want to make sure that I get this right.
This does not have to be factually accurate, by the way.
Okay, so the first thing I had to do, I realized, was define friend. What would count? Yeah. I have plenty of people who I can sort of casually call, oh, my friend so-and-so. Yeah, my friend so-and-so, he's great. Would that count for the purposes of this essay? And I basically decided no. It has to be something really special. And after hemming and hawing for like the first week of this, I was driving myself totally bonkers. And I realized, okay, I'm just looking for somebody who I truly, truly love hanging out with and whose problems I can take on. Yeah. And who will take on mine. It's as simple as that.
And shared enemies. I thought
shared enemies. We have to have some shared
very
enemies.
Important. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Somehow even more important than shared friends or people we admire. Somehow,
I think so.
Important. Yeah, defining yourself by counterexample, I guess. And so that was the definition we were working with. And my editor, Brian O'Keefe, was really helpful. We sort of talked through all of this. And I also had to set up the rules for what we could do. And I found myself wanting to do this after hanging out with an old friend of mine. And we had a blast. We had a hilarious afternoon. And, oh, no, I think she already is a friend. I don't think this counts. And so I realized that I could do anything. It could be any recreational activity. Kickball was fine, trivia was fine, whatever. But they had to be in town, and it had to be somebody who I wasn't already friends with. An acquaintance would be fine. The best possible scenario was that I met an entirely new person. I decided, the other thing is I decided it was okay to be set up.
Like a blind
like
date
on a
for
blind
friends.
date, yes, which I
Oh
did
my
go on
gosh.
to do. So those were the terms.
Okay, good deal. And then you armed yourself with some strategies. So you read DeFranco's book. Is that her name? And
I think her
also
last name's just Franco.
Franco. Okay, I want to put a duh in front of that. But Dale Carnegie.
I did read
You
Dale
dove
Carnegie.
into?
So Dale Carnegie is pretty famous. He wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, which came out in the 1930s, and it's a hilarious book if you haven't read it. With all due respect to him, it's a little bit silly. I read it a little bit as a set piece, but the reality was that there was actually some stuff in the book that really spoke to me, and something I've carried with me a lot. I say this as a sort of side note, is that he talks a ton about feedback and criticism and how no one really wants to hear criticism. And so if you can just sort of shut up unless you absolutely need to give a criticism, it's a good idea to, for the most part, make peace with people. Yeah. This sounds like so obvious, and I'm a little bit of I guess they'd call me a people pleaser. I'm a little bit of a people pleaser to begin with. So this didn't strike me as something revolutionary. But I guess at the time and for the target audience of this book, which was mostly men looking to succeed in the business world, I don't know. I guess it helped. It was a bestseller for a reason, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the title to end all titles, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh, and I thought about calling this How to Win Friend and Influence People.
Yeah, but just what? Well, when I read that book I think probably it's some point in high school. It was like, what am I doing? And so read that book, and I haven't looked at it for a long time, but certainly around the criticism. But you know what? As I reflect on it, I think one of his main messages too is just like empathy, like to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And I know that there's many, things that are dated now in the message. I think that sometimes has been lost a little bit as well. It's very easy to become extremely self-focused to the point where it can be problematic.
Oh, yeah.
Empathy is like, I don't know. That
was the part that really stuck with me. And that felt like a good lesson. Why not?
Absolutely. Okay. So you had this experiment, you had rules, you had these expert from self-help books and whispering in your ears. And so off into the world you went. I was like, I'm going to try hard for a month at making a new friend. And what happened? I mean, tell us about the wins, the pitfalls maybe that surprised you. I mean, how did it go, Kelly?
I had no idea how hard this was going to be. I thought this was going to be such a fun assignment. Make a new friend, right? How fun could that be? And I could not have been more wrong. I truly felt so vulnerable the entire time. And I would have these little report backs during our editorial meeting, and they were just excruciating because everyone would want to know, so how's it going? Have you made a friend yet? And it always felt like this binary between didn't make a friend and did make a friend. And it was like something that would flip overnight one day. And I kept sending little text messages to my editor saying things like, I did it. I think I made a friend. And then I would never really hear from them again.
Oh my God.
During the process, one of my confidants was, again, this is sort of ironic because it was about making friends, but was one of my closest friends. And I kept asking her, is this a stupid thing to say? Is this normal? I found myself so, to your point about being self-involved, I was so self-absorbed the entire time, which I realized is sort of the opposite of what I needed to be doing. I was constantly asking myself, how do I come off? Do I seem normal? Do I seem fun? And it was really not at all about what the person in front of me was giving me. And I'll give you an example of that. In the piece, I go out to drinks with a friend of a friend who was delightful.
Was this the blind date?
Yes, it was on a blind date. A friend of mine said, hey, I told her, hey, I'm doing this story. Do you have anyone? And she said, yeah, I think I know someone good for you. And so my woman at a bar, we had a blast together. But she wanted to know all about the project, and she wanted to know all about me. And I had this inner monologue going that was like so neurotic about how I was coming off. Was I talking about myself too much? And it was really the opposite of what it takes to get close to somebody. Like I was getting closer to myself, but I was not getting any closer to this stranger. And I had to cut that out, you know?
Yeah.
And so I was to a very close friend who said, well, you know, totally close. I love her so much. We have different lives in a lot of ways. She doesn't have any kids. I have a kid. At the time that I was writing this, she was sort of coming off a period of her life where she'd been dating a lot. And she compared making a friend to dating.
Totally.
Which was an obvious comparison, right? But it hadn't really hit me that way. I haven't dated in a very long time. I've been with the same romantic partner for years, like over a decade. And my friend was not in that boat. She'd also moved a bunch of times. And so she's really good at making friends. And so I asked her for some help, and that was her big tip. Think of it like dating. This obviously made me even more neurotic and weird.
But understandably so.
Yeah, I was like, oh, great. This won't exactly lower the stakes here, will it?
Right.
But as I thought about it, it makes total sense because my friendships are passionate and deep and loving and not all that different from romantic relationships in certain ways, and that they're like really intimate and it takes a long time and you can't just snap your fingers and make it happen. So that perspective shift was very helpful to me.
Yeah. No, I totally get that because, and I can also just wanted to highlight what you started going through internally related to that. I mean, self-awareness is one thing to call it, but like it can be so difficult to connect and it's almost impossible to not be like, what am I doing wrong? How am I coming across? Are people liking me or not? And getting that like focus on yourself. And I think that happens a lot to people who are dating and who really want more than anything to have this intimate, emotionally intimate connection that feels like their person. And then it's just like, what are the obstacles to making that happen? And it turns into a performance issue, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, no, go ahead. Sorry.
But I was just going to say, so that one of your takeaways over time was that when I am moving into this space, when I'm like very focused on my own performance and what I'm doing or not doing, it actually becomes a barrier to me creating that kind of connection that I want to have with people. Can you take us into that? Like just what you observed there and what you wound up doing with that?
Well, some of it, in theory, while working on this piece was that really intense self-consciousness comes from a pretty understandable desire, which is to be seen and understood by the person across from you. And one sort of shortcut to that is to tell them all about yourself and hope that they'll reflect some part of that back to you in a way that feels accurate. And to sort of like take an express train to intimacy was something I found myself wanting to do a lot.
Right.
So to put it in real terms, something I wrote about in the essay was that on that same blind date I was just telling you about, the woman I was on it with suggested that we tell each other a secret. And I loved that idea because I was like, oh, this is great. We're going to have something with each other that nobody else will ever have. You know, she said, okay, I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anybody before. And I said, okay, I'll do the same. She told some really charming secret and I told something that made me sound like a total freak. And in that moment, like it really felt like we were so close, you know, we both had a couple of beers. We were like talking about our parents' divorce. We were like getting into it, you know, but it was actually really fleeting. And as soon as we left the bar, actually that warm feeling of like, oh, I'm getting really close to somebody evaporated pretty quickly. And it was replaced with embarrassment. Like I had sort of gone a little too far.
Yeah. Brene Brown calls that the vulnerability hangover. Yeah.
Okay, that's a really good term for it.
There's a word for that experience. Thank you, Brene. Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was experiencing. And I don't know if my companion was feeling it too, but that was an experience where I realized, oh, okay, so that's not really the way to do it either. You know, it's like in politics, you talk about the difference between earned media and paid media, and paid media a little bit, you know, and I was like, okay, so that's not the way either. And that was that was a turning point for me in the project, because I realized this is going to take way longer than a month.
But there's that tendency, you know, just again, drawing that parallel to dating. Like, I think a lot of people will do that. They'll do this big fat cannonball right in the deep end of the pool. And on the first date, they're like going into all the, you know, open in the closets and the bats are flying out. And the thinking that that is kind of this fast track to emotional intimacy, but that can almost create its own set of but it's understandable as a strategy, but you're like, I don't want to do that again.
Yeah. And, you know, she sort of suggested it and I was like, oh, this is perfect. She's on board. And the other thing I should say is that I told everybody, like, I was very public about this, you know, I wasn't like, this was not like a never been kissed situation where I went undercover or whatever.
Right.
And I also wouldn't call this a reported piece. This was just an essay. This was just for fun. I also kind of found myself gravitating towards people who were like me. That was another observation that I made. Or I would ask friends of mine who I flattered myself to think were kind of like me to suggest someone else who I assumed would be like them. And on that same friend date, I realized that the person I was sitting across from was nothing like me in some key ways. Like knee-jerk reaction to that was to say, oh, this will never work. Like, we're just not really the same.
Yeah.
But the longer I sat with her, the more I realized, oh no, like I like the way she's different. I like that she's opening up my world. My friendships that I have already are so cozy. And a friend I told you about earlier, the one who lives in LA and has this big dating life, you know, we've been friends for so long and we are so close that there are some times when I can sort of forget where I end and she begins and vice versa. And we, as Gen Z says, we know each other's lore. She doesn't need to tell me her story because I know everything and I don't need to tell her mine. And as a result, I don't really know what my story is anymore. And to hear somebody else's and identify, oh, that's not my story, was a little bit helpful in saying, oh, this is who it turns out I am at age 30, redacted.
Yeah. No, I get that. When there's not enough contrast in some really deep, enduring friendships, because it's like you don't even have to talk about it. But to be in situations where you're hearing other people's stories and considering how they're similar or different to yours, but also being in a situation where you have to articulate your own, it helps kind of, I would imagine, re-clarify for yourself who you are now at this point in your life. But also, can I just bring up in your article, I think that you also shared an experience that I thought was super interesting related to, here, let me find it. I took some notes here. At one point on this growth journey, or whatever you want to call it, you went on to Bumble for friends.
I did do that.
A Bumble app for friendships.
I was worried you might bring that up.
And here we are. No, but I mean, this is part of what made your article so fun, is just like I don't know. Anyway, it was very entertaining, but I love this piece because as you were swiping through profiles, you were having this experience of the ways in which we can say, oh no, that won't be my person. But then having things, what you wrote was I was swiping through profiles of nurses who loved house music and dog owners who reported that all their real friends had just moved to Austin. You know, I mean, it's like this kinds of thing, but like talking about these obligatory things in profiles, wanting to go see the city and have great restaurants and go to yoga. And you're like, yeah.
Everyone loves coffee
but internally,
and hiking, you know?
Coffee and hiking, travel, right? but then like having this experience, like, but I like coffee and hiking, you know, but like the reasons that we have, I think, to, what is the word I'm looking for? Like build these imaginary barriers between ourselves and other people. Is that the right way to say it?
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to be, I didn't mind being a person who liked coffee and hiking, but I did mind being the type of person who would tell other people that I liked coffee and hiking, because to do so is to admit that I needed something. And I didn't
admit that you needed something.
Yeah, that I needed a friend. The whole reason I was going on this Bumble app was starting from a really humble premise. And I realized that I had sort of a problem, which was that I was really closed off and I didn't want to appear uncool. I didn't want to appear to be the type of person who needed friendship, which of course was completely ridiculous, because why else would I have downloaded the app?
Actually, can we just pause right here for a second? Because that was actually one of the key things that I had wanted to talk with you about. Because, you know, one of the reasons that I really wanted to connect with you and have this conversation for the benefit of our listeners is because I believe that there is so much internalized shame around this experience that we all can cycle through. I mean, I think it's part of the experience of evolving and like moving into adulthood and different phases of life, but that people don't talk about it. And they also, I think that the shame does something where it creates this resistance to doing something about it, because it means admitting to yourself and to other people that you want to have more positive relationships in your life, but that we have so much attached to it. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Because I feel like this is a big part of the puzzle.
That's a good question, because this is something that I grappled with a lot in the writing of this essay, that I think if I had been doing this project, if I had been trying to make friends without attaching the essay to it.
Yeah, I'm doing this for work.
Right. Yeah, it's a really good barrier. And I think that, you know, I tried to make the essay as honest as possible, but there's something inherently dishonest about presenting it in this way, you know, because it's like, oh, this is just for entertainment purposes.
It was protective.
Oh, it's for work. Yeah, I really use that as a shield. Now that it's gone, I definitely missed having it as a protective shield, because I'm still trying to make friends, you know, and not having the, oh, well, you know, I've been writing about it for work. Yeah. And I think that is about shame a little bit, because this particular, I don't know, like metric of adulthood, having functional friendships, feels so central to my sense of self. Like, oh, I have these great friends. I have these great friendships. That's part of the story I tell myself about who I am. I realized that where the practice came in, which for me is like a last minute plan. Other people want different things in friendship, but that for me is like
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, like I just want someone to grab a coffee with, or to like grab a beer with, or whatever. That is sort of something that I really need. And I realized that like my friendships were becoming way more theoretical, you know, they were all in the group chat. They were all like, you know, I have a group chat with my friends from college who are some of my closest friends in the world, that's always ongoing. I know all these details about their lives, but the truth is we hadn't sat in a room together in about a year.
Yeah.
And to admit that that's a challenge for me, because it calls into questions all of these decisions that I've made about how to structure my life, that have precluded us sitting together in a room. And it brings up everything: job choices,
totally,
family choices, lifestyle choices, you know, and I had always taken my friendships so for granted. Like, oh, these will endure no matter what choices I make. And to reach my, you know, mid-30s and discover that the choices I had made resulted in discomfort was like pretty hard, actually.
Yeah.
Way I discuss it in the essay is sort of, I put like a little bit of a gloss on it, which is, oh, should I move to Portland? Should I move to Austin? You know, maybe I could start fresh.
Right.
You know, I don't actually want to move. Like, I have this great job here. I have a whole life in New York. I
Yeah.
don't want to move. But it was kind of code for what mistakes did I make that got me to this point. Um, and
Yeah.
it's sort of part of any come to Jesus moment in your 30s.
Yeah, like what you're beginning to the seeds that you planted are bearing fruit.
Yes.
And you're looking at some of this
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, yeah, I guess I did create that
I mean, does
reality.
that
But
answer your question or
it
not
will.
really?
No, it does. But it's that I think I'm hearing that it was almost a surprise in some way because the seeds that you planted, the values that you were expressing, the life that you had built, the kind of longer term outcome of that, looking at your like aspects of it surprised you and
Mm-hmm.
that felt a little bit unwelcome. But can I also just say though that it's like we all need to make choices. Like it is so hard to have intention and energy going into all of these different things. I mean, like you have this amazing career. You're working at Esquire magazine, you're married, you're a mom. I mean, I'm sure have all of these different facets of your life and things that are going really well. But it's like we can only juggle so many balls or spin so many plates.
Yeah.
And it's oftentimes that friendship one that does get dropped because it's like, but that as time moves on, and again, going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, how research shows that that is one of the most important things when it comes to that long-term well-being and happiness, that's the one that gives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for understandable reasons. Like you mentioned that this piece had given you some insight into the phase of life pieces and like kids, no kids, some of those metrics. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think that has something to do with it. I know for my own life, it certainly does.
I think in both a practical and a sort of more squishy sense, it has a lot to do with this. You know, from the practical, there's what you're talking about. There are only so many hours in the day. Having a kid, especially a young kid or kids, is exhausting. Having a full-time job is exhausting. Just being a person in the world is exhausting.
Like a homeowner, like dishes, like there's
yeah. I'm not a homeowner, but I am a dish owner. And so I know what that's like.
You have a dwelling to maintain, I'm sure.
And like so yeah, that's so real. And, my sort of anxiety around that, I think, is what motivated me to pursue productivity as the sort of precursor to this and sort of thinking there's got to be a way to jam it all in. Spoiler on that one. There really isn't a way to jam it all in.
I should definitely read that article then, because you're telling me it'll make me feel better about my own.
I don't know about that, but
inability to, yeah.
Okay. But the like emotional piece of it is real too. So like making decisions is just part of growing up, and there are so many parts of life that require an affirmative decision. Like you can't just wait for it to happen to you. Whether that's, okay, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to decide to have kids, or I'm going to decide not to have kids. I'm going to take this job or this one instead, or no job at all and live out of a van in some cool way in the Pacific Northwest. Make those decisions is also a decision. That's a cliche that people say all the time. And there definitely was a part of me in writing this that was really nostalgic for the days before I had made these decisions. Like when Maxine used to come over with Red Stripe, we were at a point in our lives where we had decisions for sure. We just graduated from school. We decided to move to the big city together. We hadn't really done anything that couldn't be undone, which is not how it felt at the time. It felt like, most of my life is already behind me and I've already screwed it up in 80 different ways.
Right.
15 years later, I can look at that and say, oh no, I hadn't really done anything. I could have gone in any direction. I could have moved to Montana and had a toddler, or I could have stayed, like that apartment where my Red Stripe friend used to come over, my husband and I, like 10 years later, moved right across the street. We didn't go anywhere. She moved all the way to Montana. Like there are two ways of doing adulthood.
Yeah.
And now
definitely.
Here we are in our 30s, and we're like sort of living with those choices. And I think on some level, there was a part of me that felt like, oh, if I don't ever move, I won't ever have to change anything. I won't have to make any choices.
Yeah.
I'm probably overanalyzing myself a little bit right now, but
well, no, but I mean, I think it's a really interesting reflection and something for all of us to be aware of, that even if you're not realizing it, every time you walk through a door, particularly a big one, like how Maxine did, maybe, it closes behind you.
Right.
And a lot of times you can't go back again, but that even if you stay in place, that other people are going through their own doors, and that the river is evolving, right? Even if you're standing in the center of it, it's never the same. And just kind of grappling with the reality of that. That's really powerful. But I think it is an important awareness in this conversation about how to develop new friendships, especially in adulthood, is because it's almost like you have to be part of the river again. You have to move and almost find a different community, that work of who am I now, and who do I fit with, and where are my people, that you have to swim.
It also puts you in touch with where you are in the river.
Yeah.
You're in touch with your friends from a million years ago. That's such a comforting feeling, There's so much work behind those friendships. But when you jump in the river, to use your metaphor, you have to sort of contend with where you are right now. And sometimes where you are right now is sort of like, oh, I'm in the middle of something here. I'm not ready for prime time or whatever. But there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
interesting.
Oh. And so, so to kind of take us to the end of your story here, one of the things that I took from your experiment is that you realized through it that it wasn't even a singular friendship that appealed to you the most, as much as it was this experience of being part of a really vibrant community, like that, many of us have had at different points in life, where it's, college or traveling with people, or just like there's certain chapters that just have this relational energy around them. And can you say more about that?
I'm glad you brought this up. This was the most important recognition for me in writing this. I think it was my editor referred to the piece taking an anti-capitalist twist toward the end, in the sense that it became clear to me that I don't just want one friend who I can gab with and sort of like info dump on and receive their info. I wanted the feeling of being like supported and held and seen by like a bunch of people. And I see a bunch of people every day in my office, and I love the people I work with. I mean, I really like the people I work with. And that is a community of a kind, but friendship is really special. There's no, you don't have to influence people in order to be friends.
But it's voluntary all the way around.
Right. And that is not the case in like most of the spaces that adults inhabit. Like, I was told, oh, you'll have a kid, you'll make a bunch of friends with their parents. Like, that's true and not true, but it's not like a completely exchange-free space. I think there's status wrapped up in being friends with other parents in a way that, someone you connect with just because you've connected with them is hopefully, an environment where status doesn't quite matter so much. But I realized that I needed like a lot of people. Like I wanted a friend group, basically. That's a hard thing to maintain when you're like working all the time and doing dishes all the time and taking your kid to school. So this essay was really fun to write, but the part that made me actually really sad in an enduring way was my realization that for friendship, whether that's, whether you're the type of person who likes a one-on-one friend or a community, that's like a near universal yearning.
Mhm.
But the way that life is set up for the vast majority of people makes it almost impossible to have that.
Yeah.
And that made me feel a lot of sadness. Like,
Yeah.
oh, we are structurally like betting against ourselves in this
Mhm.
regard, is a realization that sort of, goes far beyond the scope of the essay and beyond the scope of this conversation. But it is something that has influenced my thinking, I would say,
Yeah.
that, we can't do this all alone. And in a way,
Mhm.
me hopping from, my 4 p.m. meeting to a 5 p.m. friend date is a lonely endeavor. Like that's just me trying
Mhm.
to make my life better through my own energies instead of out of
Mhm.
any sort of structural change that might help that. We're
I
living
hear
in a
you.
moment that's really, you know, you talked about being focused on the self, and
Mhm.
that has emotional repercussions, but it's also something I think that happens because we go to work and we go home and we're alone in our
Yes.
apartments and we're alone with our devices. And um,
Right.
that's not something that I could fix in a month with friend
No.
dates. And that
Hear
that
you.
was a part of it that I think I had a harder time grappling with because it didn't
Mhm.
feel like something I could come up with a solution to. Everybody said when I started this, just pick up a hobby.
Mm.
I think that's good advice in many ways, but it also, I think, falls really short of the real problem here, which is that
Right.
we've made life a little bit lonely structurally. And,
Yeah.
there's no amount of like woodworking classes is going to fix that.
I hear you. Well, you know what? This is actually making me think of a similar realization that I had personally a number of years ago. So, and this is connected to a much larger story, but when our son was, well, we've actually done this a couple of times, but the time that I'm thinking of, our son was 5 and 6, and my husband and I took the show on the road and just traveled for a year
How
and
fun.
wound up, it was great, and connected though with a community of people, of other families, other travelers who were doing the same thing. And it turned into this like very tight knit collective, like a diaspora moving from place to place. But it was frequently on my mind, the fact that human beings are actually designed to exist in tribes and collectives, in these units of, but
Hmm.
25, 30, 40 people is about the max size of these. But for the
Interesting.
entirety of our evolutionary experience, like this is how we operated in the world. And I remember enjoying this experience of being part of this community so much. And it just felt so natural, like kind of hanging out with each other's kids or like doing different things or coming back for meals. And I, after leaving that lifestyle, have missed that so much personally. And it's been very difficult to recreate in a different type of lifestyle. But that the way that we are living now structurally, each in our little individual homes and having to make appointments with each other in order to like see somebody or hang out, it is in opposition to the way that human beings were literally designed to exist. And
Uh-huh.
I think that we do
Interesting.
all have this hunger for that kind of not a singular connection, but to be part of this collective that you were describing in your story. And so just hearing you talk about this a little bit more made me think of that. And I wish that there was a way to have more of that
Yeah.
as part of our life experience. Yeah.
It's something that you get a lot of if you're lucky enough to like go to college or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's something
Yeah.
that is built into college in a sort of
Yeah.
non-eccentric way. I have
Mm-hmm.
found that the older I get, the more, phrases like living in community, there's a
Mm-hmm.
certain sort of outside of the mainstream
Yeah.
feel to
Right.
that.
Right. I hear you.
Like I think most people might be like, well, I don't know about that. But that
Yeah.
doesn't eliminate the desire for like, oh yeah, I do want a community.
Right.
I do want that. Like, yeah, I don't want to live off the grid. I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to still, have the internet and running water, but it would be
Right.
kind of nice if like someone else could make dinner tonight and we could just shoot the shit around the fire.
Exactly. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Has
But
been my communist manifesto, I guess.
That's right. Well, but that's a nice, way to end on it. And going back to one of the, the pieces of advice from the author that you mentioned is just like a lot of just unstructured time. Nothing is planned necessarily, but you have opportunities just to be with people and get to know them and share experiences. And that maybe that is one takeaway for our listeners too is where could that be in your world, if it's to be able to connect with people but also to be thinking about it more broadly. It's like where is there a community that you could plug into that would feel congruent with who you are in this phase of your life, and work on that.
Yeah. Although if only or as easy as plug into that community.
I know,
Right?
that's
I mean,
right.
that's the thing. I didn't even get into this, how to sort of infiltrate a friend group. But
oh, wait, there's more.
no, I mean, something that sort of ended up on the cutting room floor was this idea of approaching an already established friend group and trying to add myself to it. But that, that's a fantasy too.
But also a strategy to connect with an existing pod, to use a pandemic term. Yeah.
Wonderful. But anyway, it was a good experience, and it was all about the friends I made along the way.
Definitely. All right. Well, then in closing, any last pieces of advice, if somebody's listening to this and being like, yeah, this is important to me. I want to have more friends in my life. Do you have any tips or things that you're like, don't do that, try this? or is it just that you have to have your own life experience and find your own way?
I think I'm qualified to give anybody advice about anything, but if I could give myself some advice, a month and a half ago, when I first started writing this, it was think about yourself way less. Oh my God. Like, think about other people.
Yeah.
Think about yourself less.
Dale Carnegie was right, basically. Okay.
It pains me to admit it after all the clowning on him I did, but yeah, he was kind of right about that.
All right, there you have it. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. This was such a fun conversation. Before we end this, where could our listeners learn about you, check out this article or other pieces that you have coming out, or anything else that you guys are up to there at Esquire?
Yeah, well, go to esquire.com. I should have like some sort of log line for esquire.com, shouldn't I? Check out esquire.com. We've got it all. We've got politics, fashion, style, celebrity, lifestyle, tips on how to make a friend. We've got it all. Check us out.
Definitely.
There's more of my writing there, and more of our legendary writers going all the way back to 1933.
Amazing, including Kelly Stout. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.